But I think the prerequisite to a miracle is that you don't have to be perfect, you have to be willing. Sai Baba does not heal everyone. There are people that come to the ashram that are crippled and blind, and he knows what medicine they need, and sometimes the medicine they need is to learn to deal with whatever medical problem he has. People have come with cancer, and with a wave of his hand he's healed it. Sometimes he gives them vibhuti, sometimes he says go have surgery, and sometimes he lets them die. So you cannot understand why the miracles happen, but when you've been around him a while, you know that they happen constantly, and when they're not happening, you have to search your heart and find out what's gone wrong. Sai Baba says whatever path you're on is your path to God, be on it. He doesn't care if you're Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish. Sai Baba's teachings are very simple, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. And those were the same teachings as Lord Jesus. If Lord Jesus works for you, love Lord Jesus with all your heart. When you've got that, you've got Sai Baba inside you, whether you know his name and form. For those of us who've been lucky enough to come and be in the divine presence, very few of us have doubts. When he took the letter, he looked at me right in the eyes and he smiled so sweetly, and our fingers touched, and he was electric. And he went to the end of our section and he turned to go up towards the inner temple, towards the mandir, and when he turned the corner, I had this thought, did he just take all of my karma? And as soon as I had the thought, an ocean of light poured in through the top of my head, and the tears came, and this energy ran for about 14 hours as he washed me from the inside out.
What does an ocean of light feel like?
It is equivalent to it. It was the most wonderful golden white light that came in through the top of my head and just filled my entire body, and it just kept running.
It wasn't your imagination.
It wasn't my imagination.
You weren't dreaming.
I wasn't dreaming.
Longtime follower of holy man Sri Sathya Sai Baba, Killian. Kelly is from Arkansas in the United States, but he would be the first to tell you that today his home is in Prashanti Nilayam. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded in Sai Baba's ashram, Prashanti Nilayam, India, in January of 2004. Thanks for agreeing to sit here for this. What brought you to Baba?
Well, I started hearing about Sai Baba in about 1980. It was the year after I got out of law school, and I had some friends who knew about him, and they told me that there was a holy man in India that could just wave his hand and materialize any object, and he gave rings and necklaces and diamonds and presents to his devotees. And the first time I ever heard about him, I had this thought, one day I'll go see him. And every time thereafter when I heard about Sai Baba, I had the same thought, someday I'll go see him. So that just stayed in the back of my mind. In 1988, I had a massage teacher by the name of Sarah Stewart in California who told her story on a videotape, which I watched. And on the videotape, she described how she was unhappily married to a lawyer and living in Sonoma, and a woman she barely knew came up to her and said, I have an apartment at an ashram that belongs to an Indian holy man named Sathya Sai Baba, and I have a round-trip ticket which is not refundable, but it's transferable. And she said, we have a family emergency and I can't use the ticket, and I got in my meditation, it's for you if you want to go. So Sarah thought about it for 3 days and said yes, and she came to the ashram. And she described on the video how she used to sit day after day on front row, and Baba would come to her, and she watched the Indian women reach down and touch his feet or the hem of his robe, and then they'd go into a swoon or begin to cry, and she was just too proper, too uptight to do that, so she never touched his feet, even though he'd stand in front of her day after day after day. And one night, as her trip was almost over, she was back in her apartment here at the ashram in India, and she had this thought that he operates outside of time and space. So she said she bowed down as she was falling asleep. She kissed his feet, and she asked him...
In her mind?
In her mind, yeah. She just imagined this. And she asked him to heal her karma, and she fell asleep. And she said that night she had a dream. And in the dream, he started showing her a movie with a wave of his hand on the wall of the apartment. And then she said, I realized I wasn't dreaming, I was awake, and he was standing in the room, but I could see through him. But the movie was still going, and the name of the movie was called Healing the Healer, starring Sarah Stewart and Sai Baba. And he showed her life's work. And she said, but the movie kept going faster and faster. And she asked him to slow it down, and he laughed, and he said, no, that'll be revealed to you later. Well, Sarah went on to become one of California's great shamans, a great healer, and all of her workshops are called Healing the Healer, starring Sarah Stewart and Sai Baba. And a couple weeks after watching her video, I was in my apartment in San Francisco on a Sunday night, and as I was falling asleep, I called upon Sai Baba. I bowed down, I kissed his feet, I asked him to heal my karma, and I fell asleep. And that night I had a dream. And in the dream, what I thought was a Brazilian medicine man, because he had this big hairdo, and I just assumed Sai Baba had long white hair and stringy beard. I had no idea what he looked like, but every guru I had ever seen a picture of had long white hair and a stringy beard. Stood by my bed, and he touched me with 2 fingers, and he opened my 6th and 7th chakras, and he filled me with so much light. I woke up, and it was like, like that. I was just completely surprised, and he was standing by my bed. And then he was gone. And for the next 5 days, I was just floating. I didn't know what had happened to me. It was something really wonderful. And I was just filled with light. And about 2 weeks later, I was in a metaphysical bookstore in San Francisco, and I saw a book called Man of Miracles, Sathya Sai Baba. And I pulled the book out, and there was a picture of Sai Baba on the back. And when I saw this picture, I just absolutely I freaked. It was like, oh, of course that's who it was. That's who I prayed to. And I've always told people that Baba came to me in 1988 and stole my heart, but I didn't come to see Sai Baba until 1997.
And I've asked you this before, and I'll ask you again. Why?
Why did I come?
Why did you not come sooner to him?
Well, I was working in a huge law firm in California, and
you were a lawyer?
I was a lawyer in those days. I also had been studying for years all sorts of metaphysical things. I had become an ordained minister. I spent 5 years training as a clairvoyant. I studied with Lazarus, a channeled consciousness, for 10 years. Any
particular denomination of being a minister?
It was non-denominational Christian. That's the best way to put it. It was a healing ministry. And I eventually formed my own church up in Portland, Oregon, and just did healing services, but had no doctrine whatsoever. I just tried to meet people on whatever path they were on. But in 1990, I began working on what was the largest lawsuit in the United States. It was called the Case from Hell on the 8th Circuit. And by 1993, I was over the edge, and we'd been working just unbelievable hours.
How many hours a week?
About 16 hours a day, usually 7 days a week.
You mentioned earlier to me before we started of your chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yes.
Maybe it might have had its origins in 16-hour workdays?
Yes, and 35 cups of coffee a day. Yeah, I was pushing the envelope. And not only was I working like 2 full-time jobs at a law firm, I also had a small clientele, and I did healing work, and I used to be on a radio show in San Francisco called Alchemical Radio, and I had a little healing center in Napa that I used with a friend of mine from Napa, and I did workshops, and I took 4 days a month, and I studied with Lazarus. So I was about the busiest man I've ever met, and I could survive very well on 3 or 4 hours of sleep every night until 1994, when I just broke like a stick. And I found out I had Epstein-Barr. I quit my job at the law firm, and I thought if I just took a couple weeks off and maybe traveled and took a vacation in Bali or something for a month, I'd be all right. And I went to Portland, Oregon, and spent 2 years in bed at a friend's house, and I was still sick. And I've had this roller coaster of chronic fatigue for the last 9 years. Recently I've realized that Baba is all names and all forms, and one of the forms he took with me was chronic fatigue, and he used that as a way to transform my life. I was on the wrong path. I wanted to do healing work, and yet I kept going back to law because I like the money.
So things that appear to be bad can in fact be good and can in fact be divine like anything else.
Yes.
So chronic fatigue was Baba.
Chronic fatigue was Baba. I didn't recognize that for a long time. In 1997, over Memorial Weekend, I went to a weekend retreat at ashram in Southern California by Anandi Devi, a Caucasian guru. And at the end of the workshop, she sent for me, and she took me into her garden, and she held my hands, and she looked me in the eye, and she welcomed me, and she said, you know, you're always welcome here. This is your home. She said, but we're not your guru. She said, Sai Baba is your guru. Your next step is to go to India and see Sai Baba. He holds your heart in his hands. She said, you're being stripped to the bone. Everything is being taken from you, your health, your wealth, your home, your image, your career. Everything that your ego knows is you is dying because you've been praying a prayer of purification and that you want to be a great healer. She said, this is the Shiva dance. She said, do not try to go back to law. Do not try starting a healing center yet. You need a stronger spiritual foundation before you begin. So I spent the summer trying to go back to law or start a healing center, and I just didn't have the energy, and I couldn't manifest anything. And by August, I was down to my last $18 on earth, having no place to live. And this was a big fall. At one point, I'd been living in a penthouse on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco, and living La Vie en Rose, and suddenly everything was just in shambles. My life just felt like it was completely ruined, and I was in tremendous pain, just a tremendous emotional pain. I just, you know, I'd been a magnet for success for decades, and suddenly, you know, I was almost completely homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And I began writing Baba and mailing letters every day saying, you know, I have chronic fatigue, I'm in pain, bring me home. And by 1997, that fall in August, when I finally realized I had $18 left, I realized I have nothing and no place to go. And when you have nothing and no place to go to God. And I charged a ticket, and I came to India. And I prayed to Sai Baba. I said, you know, I don't even know how to find you. Send me someone that can show me the way. And lo and behold, I was connected with a woman by the name of Pat Garland, who was coming for her 21st trip. She was a longtime devotee. And we met, we liked each other, and we traveled together. And so I had a companion that made it a little easier to get here. And from the point where I decided to come, it was just all this magic happened. By the time I stepped on the plane, I had about $350 in my pocket, so I wasn't completely broke getting here. But I was ill. One of the big leelas that happened on the first trip was we had a layover in Singapore for 2.5 hours, and we arrived at midnight. Getting off the plane, she met an Indian man who was living in Sacramento, California, who was on our flight, and he had just finished writing a book on Advaita, the philosophy of non-dualism. And he was a Sai Baba devotee, and he was en route to Bangalore for a family reunion or a wedding. She had just finished writing a book on Advaita, so we invited him to breakfast, and we found a restaurant open on a mezzanine in the lavish Singapore airport. And as we were going up the escalator, I noticed the music, and the music was a hymn, and it was my favorite hymn from childhood. And I thought, this is very strange, but it was an orchestral version.
Yeah.
We went